Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
Is Indian secularism dead? Did it die on August 5 in Ayodhya when the Bhumi Pujan for the Ram temple took place by Prime Minister Narendra Modi in the presence of the Chief Minister and Governor of the state and RSS Chief Mohan Bhagwat? Because if that is true, then it follows that a new Indian Republic was invented on August 5, a Hindu India or a Hindu Rashtra. Now, if these two are accepted, then a third point will follow, and that is that for those of us who believe in the secular constitution, it becomes then quite reasonable to say, this is not the country I was born in, this is not the country I want to live in, so I am going away. If I have the luxury, I am going away, hopefully to America, maybe by the end of this year when Donald Trump goes and immigration eases up a bit, because this is not the country whose constitution I believed in. In this week's National Interest, we are arguing that these presumptions are bunk. It isn't as if there is no problem, there are new challenges, but these presumptions are hasty and add up to bunkum, because the death of Indian secularism has been announced many times in the last 35 years. In fact, it's the rumors of the death of Indian secularism that have circulated periodically in the last 35 years, and they've always been vastly exaggerated. So we carry on with apologies to Mark Twain for dragging him into our messy politics. Now, if all these presumptions were true, and if you had the option or you had the luxury of going away to America or Britain or Europe or someplace more secular and liberal. So if you had a green card, or if you had the money to buy permanent residency, or if you had a generous uncle waiting somewhere, or if one of your friends was a good asylum lawyer, or if you had the benefit of a generous grant by a foundation, you could escape, but that will be very few of you. All the rest of us, in fact almost all of us 138 crore Indians, will then be living in this country. Now, you can always say that, look, you are living in this country, you have nowhere to go, so you live in this country. When you are able to change things, which means when you are able to vote Modi out, then we will come back and say that your secularism is back. Now, that is a completely unreasonable argument, and I am exaggerating it to underline this as thickly as possible, because as I said earlier, the death of secularism is announced periodically in India. In 1985, it was announced by the other side, by the Hindu right, when Rajiv Gandhi used Parliament to make a constitutional amendment to set aside the Supreme Court judgment of the Shah Bano case. Then it was invoked again when Rajiv Gandhi proactively, ahead of almost any other country, banned satanic verses, that is Salman Rushdie's book, because they were protests by Muslims. Then, because he was on the rebound and he was facing a Hindu blowback, he allowed the reopening of the gates of the temple mosque complex in Ayodhya, and then he allowed the Shilanyas. Shilanyas is the foundation stone laying, and then he launched his 1989 general election campaign from Ayodhya, Faizabad, and promised Ram Rajya to all of India. So once again, there was a good occasion to pronounce the death of Indian secularism. But Indian secularism wasn't dying. It was still living in 1992 when Babri Masjid fell, but now it was dead and buried under the rubble. But somehow it came back. It came back strongly enough then for this secularism to define Indian politics for the next 25 years. So you could put together coalitions among parties that hated each other and were also rivals to each other. You could put together their coalitions just to keep the BJP out of power. So secularism then became the new binary in the Indian political system. And so it also benefited those parties. You see that after 92, when the Kalyan Singh government was dismissed in Uttar Pradesh, BJP did not come back to power immediately in the elections that followed. It was actually the SP and BSP who shared those 5 years in power. Because even among mainstream Hindus, there was revulsion at the destruction of the mosque, and among a large number of mainstream Hindus, not all, revulsion at the destruction of the mosque and the riots that followed. People like me then used to say, we Indians are proving that there is no vote for beating up on anybody. So those forces then enjoyed political power with this new secularism. A new secularism was invented after 1992. If you go before 1992, Indira Gandhi, Rajiv Gandhi, Narasimha Rao, they were very cautious that while they patronized the Muslims and minorities, while they spoke for them, they were never seen to be mocking Hinduism, or they were never seen to be ignoring Hinduism, or they were never seen to be defensive or I'd say embarrassed about their own Hindu origins or their own Hindu commitment. That was true of all of the Congress. But it began to change after 1992 because one, there was anger over the destruction of the mosque within the Congress party, on the left of the Congress party and among left intelligentsia. There was also resentment within the Congress party against Narasimha Rao. Those who resented him then went to Sonia Gandhi and then provoked her into undermining Narasimha Rao, ultimately and taking over the party, because it was then seen as if Narasimha Rao was essentially an RSS man deep inside. In fact, the statement about him used to be, he wears khaki chaddis, khaki shorts under his dhoti. So it was decided that a correction needed to be made by the Congress and the left forces, and they overcorrected it. That got them power. Also against the run of play. So two united front arrangements that came in under Gowda and Gujral, they were short-lived, but these were both against the run of play and against the will of the people at that point, because BJP did not have enough numbers, but others would not join it. So they would then set up these unlikely coalitions which will last for a long time. Frankly, even UPA 1 was a minor victory on points, and that government also came up because of against the run of play. 2009 UPA 2 was the first time these secular forces got a mandate of their own. But in this process, lots of mistakes were made. Now we can count dozens of them, but if we look at the more prominent ones, as UPA 1 came in, the first thing was the abolition of POTA, Prevention of Terrorism Act, because it was seen to be something that irritated and that worried the Muslims, because too many innocent Muslims were being picked up under that law on suspicion or on maybe fake charges of being terrorists. So immediately, at a time when there was a lot of terrorism in the country, a lot of the Hindus saw that as appeasement. But it wasn't even appeasement. It didn't even help the Muslims, because the Congress party or UPA at the same time brought in the new UAPA, Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, which in some ways were even more draconian than POTA. I mean, if you think that this is any softer than POTA, then ask all the people that Narendra Modi government and other BJP governments in the states have now locked up under that law, beginning with Dr. Kafil Khan. And then such a committee was set up to look at the status of Muslims. It even raised questions about the number of Muslims in the armed forces, something that I wrote a whole national interest about, that you are now getting into very dangerous territory. Then there were other mistakes made, the Batla House encounter in Delhi, in which well-known, prominent terrorists of Indian Mujahideen, group called Indian Mujahideen, were killed. The police officer who led that encounter was also killed in that encounter. That police officer was given the Ashok Chakra, India's highest Peacetime Gallantry Award by the UPA government. And at the same time, its own leaders, Congress's own leaders, began to raise questions about that encounter as if it was a fake encounter and asking for inquiries. Digvijay Singh even going so far as to say that when Muslim youth went and told Mrs. Gandhi exactly what had happened, she had tears in her eyes. That immediately led to a feeling that to assuage Muslim feelings, Congress party had decided to be, Congress party was open to being soft even on terrorism. So when you added this all up, a new mood built up. So that is something that was happening on one side. Now on the other side, by 2001-2 we saw the rise of Narendra Modi. Then we saw the riots in Gujarat. When the riots happened, once again the death of secularism was announced. The riots have happened. Vajpayee talked of Raj Dharma, but he was not able to deliver on that promise. Then we saw the rise of Modi, and in fact I wrote 2 articles in that period after each of the elections, that the first 2 elections that Modi won, 2002 and 2007. In each article I said that Modi was now rising as a national leader. His rise was inevitable. By the time I wrote the second article in 2007, National Interest, I said his rise as a national force, dominant national force, was now unstoppable. In fact, I went to the extent of saying that his short-sleeved kurtas will now inevitably become a popular fashion statement in politics. Now, there was a lot of criticism at that point, but I was known Modi Bhakt. I don't think even Narendra Modi will call me a Bhakt, or at least accuse me of being a Modi Bhakt. But I am a journalist trained to see facts as they are and not as I might wish them to be, or not as I might see them through any blinkers. I look at or try to look at news and developments as a doctor might look at the diagnostic report of a patient, irrespective of the identity of the patient. So you could then see that Modi was now building a counter to this kind of new post-92 secularism, and he was gaining ground. So once again, 2014, Modi won big time, secularism died yet again. 2019, he won even bigger, so secularism was still alive to be killed yet again, and now it's been killed in Ayodhya. Now you might say, oh, but this time I have seen its corpse, and this time I am performing an autopsy. Now once again, that is short-sighted, because something has died. In my book, what has died is not Indian secularism as defined by India's constitution. What has died is the new secularism, very left-oriented, which was redefined or confected after 1992. That is now over. In fact, the fact that it was over had become evident to its followers a couple of years back, because if that had not happened, we would not have seen Rahul Gandhi flaunting his Janevu and Dattatreya Gotra, claim of being a Brahmin, and seen visiting all these temples. Because the idea then was to say that, look, we are not anti-Hindu, we are not Hindu, that we are not disowning our faith. But the fact is, and this is something that Yogendra Yadav also wrote for us on the print just the other day, that instead of arguing with supporters of Hindutva in their language, which was Hindi, these post-92 secular spokesmen spoke with them from a higher moral and intellectual ground in English language, which is a metaphor that Yogendra uses quite brutally, but also in a manner that mocked the Hindu faith. And that is what they are paying for now. So to that extent, that secularism is now over. But remember, this is India. This is not Turkey. This is not Turkey where an Erdogan can come and say and write a new constitution, because what Ataturk left for him was not really a democratic constitution. So he can write a new constitution and he can say Hagia Sophia is now a mosque. It's not a museum anymore. What Ataturk had done there was that a building which was constructed as a church was used for almost 500 years as a mosque after a Muslim conquest. He, in a statement which was as secular as it was in denial of the faith, of religiosity, he said this will be a museum now, this will not be a place of worship. He did not do it because there was pressure or there was a fight between Christians and Muslims in Turkey to lean on one side, because there are hardly any Christians in Turkey. He did it because in his view of politics or in his republic, he could keep religion out. But in real life democracies, you cannot do those things. So you had a funny situation where Ataturk gave you a religiously liberal and secular dispensation, but not a democratic one. Then democratically, Erdogan got power. He wrote a new constitution or several sections of it, and in the process, he's given you a democratic system which is not secular. So these are arguments that go on all the time. India, on the other hand, has a constitution which cannot be tampered with beyond a limit. So you might think that things that you hold so dear in the constitution, as I do too, those are under stress, but this is the time for everybody who believes in it to fight for it. Because remember, in 1993, Government of India, Narasimha Rao government even passed a law saying that besides Babri Masjid, Ram Janmabhoomi, all other religious sites in India will always remain the way they were on August 15, 1947. There will not be a change of the status of any of those. BJP protested, but by a large majority, this was passed in Parliament. You could say that BJP can again call the Parliament and abrogate that law, possibly. But even in that Supreme Court judgment allowing the construction of the temple, very cleverly and very wisely, the judges have now positioned that law within the basic structure of India's constitution. So what's happened in August 5 is a setback for classical secular ideas and thinking. It is not the end of Indian constitutional secularism, and if you believe in it, this is the time to speak up for it or to fight for it instead of declaring its death and accepting defeat.